Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ethiopios Tafara, and I'm Vice President and Chief Risk, Legal, and Sustainability Officer at MIGA. Today's event is going to focus on the very important issue of private capital to scale up green and climate-resilient transportation. And the transport sector, as many of you know, is responsible for a fifth of global carbon dioxide emissions. And without decarbonizing the transport sector, we would fall short of meeting the global net zero commitments and development goals on a livable planet. Low carbon transportation can take many forms, including e-mobility, mass transport, and multimodal transportation systems. Electrification and switching to lower carbon fuels is, of course, critical to the path to decarbonization, with use of only internal combustion engines being somewhat unrealistic. Additionally, as transportation infrastructure has a long, useful life, the physical impacts of warming climate, such as extreme weather events, is likely to challenge the performance of these systems. So it's therefore quite important that the transportation infrastructure be climate resilient to avoid operational and financial losses. Today we have a lineup of 4 excellent panelists from the public and private sector, as well as MIGA, who will share their experiences supporting climate-smart transportation projects. Starting with our panelists on stage, we have Mr. Tierno Brahim, who is the Director General at the Conseil Exécutif Transport Urbain de Dakar. We have Mr. Thierry Do, who is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at Meridiam. Joining us virtually, we have Ms. Nina Valcic, who is advisor and lawyer with Corridori Serbia, and Ms. Elena Paley, who is the Sector Manager for Infrastructure with MIGA. So without any further ado, Tierno, I'm going to turn to you. And the organization that you lead, the Executive Council of Urban Transport of Dakar, is committed to modernizing and enhancing the quality of public transport systems in Senegal. Can you share with us Senegal's priorities for decarbonizing its transportation sector and your organization's role in advancing these priorities?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je suis très heureux de partager avec vous ce panel, avec Monsieur Deo en particulier, avec lequel nous sommes engagés sur un projet durable de mobilité avec le premier BRT 100% électrique au monde qui va être alimenté à l'énergie solaire. Je voudrais dire ceci de manière résumée. Le CETUD est l'autorité organisatrice de la mobilité pour s'attaquer à ces enjeux climatiques comme vous le savez, le transport est un contributeur extrêmement important. On essaie de travailler sur 3 piliers. Et je voudrais d'ailleurs, c'est un message pour les autres villes africaines, qu'on commence par le début, la gouvernance, la planification et ensuite le financement.
Tierno, you might want to give her a chance to translate in the meantime.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here as a member of this panel. As I've been introduced, I'm the Director General for this program for urban transportation that are sustainable in Dakar. We've implementing our program BRT on a 100% basis electrical and to face climate changes issue. As you know, in transportation is one of the main issues, and I would recommend that this is extended to other African villages. And for that purpose, we are basing our actions on 3 pillars: the governance, planning, and financing.
Alors, commencer par le début, c'est mettre en place des autorités organisatrices de la mobilité qui sont capables de porter la politique du gouvernement en matière de décarbonisation des transports. Et il faut les doter immédiatement de stratégies de mobilité. Pour Dakar, nous avons initié plusieurs stratégies de mobilité à Dakar et dans les villes secondaires à travers l'initiative, par exemple, Mobilize Your City. Et ensuite, je viendrai sur le financement.
So it is very important when we organize our governmental policies that we support the authorities who are indeed implementing the decarbonization practices. And I'm going to start with mobility and the project we have in Dakar.
Sur le pilier financement, je pense qu'il y a énormément de défis à relever encore, y compris avec le secteur privé. C'est le nerf de la guerre, mais je développerai ces aspects plus tard. Ce que je veux dire, c'est qu'à partir de ces 3 piliers, nous avons 2 enjeux transversaux qui guident nos actions: la transition énergétique et numérique, en mettant en priorité la mobilité collective et active au Sénégal. Et ensuite, nous souhaitons que cette mobilité soit verte et décarbonée. Avec ces 2 pieds, nous sommes en train de mettre en place les actions qui servent à la fois nos populations, mais qui répondent à la santé des hommes et de l'environnement.
So talking about finances, and the big challenge we have is cooperation with the private sector to cover the 3 pillars I talked about: governance, planning, and financing. And there are 2 important mainstreaming goals that we have in that purpose, which is energy transition and digital transition. And in all of these actions, we need to take the purpose of collective mobility in Senegal, and one of the options we're thinking is about green carbon.
Je termine sur ces aspects pour dire que la stratégie de mobilité, c'est un appel aussi au secteur privé et au MIGA. Nous avons une stratégie aujourd'hui 2035 qui va être complètement décarbonée avec des transports capacitaires, bien sûr, dans une métropole qui fera 7 millions d'habitants en 2040. Et ce plan est estimé pour un investissement de 2,5 milliards d'euros. En intégrant les questions de résilience climatique naturellement, d'inclusion sociale et de transport décarboné.
So, as I said, private sector is very important, and in that regard, MEGA is supporting. And we're having a plan ahead for 2035, where decarbonization will be one of the main issues. We are covering in that project 7 million inhabitants in the metropolis, and we will have 5 billion invested in resilience and climate, and taking into account society, which is also one of the important pillars.
Thank you, Tierno. Thierry, Meridiam plays a very significant role in mobilizing private capital into both low carbon as well as climate resilient transportation systems. Can you say a few words about what your focus is when it comes to these transportation systems at Meridiam?
Yeah, when it comes to transportation, I think rather than just building new low-carbon transportation system, we also focus on decarbonizing the existing. So whether it is about ports, whether it is about roads, between lighting, new green areas, and other things, we actually have a roadmap to decarbonize all our transportation systems around the world. And when it comes to, and this is also why we're very excited about this BRT in Dakar. I mean, initially, we had to show that we could finance this almost on the same terms as we could finance a diesel-operated set of buses. And I remember how we had to, obviously some concessional funding helped through this process, but again, as much as it is obvious today, 3 or 4 years ago, it wasn't so obvious to actually make this a case that was sustainable financially. So I'm glad that now the new normal is to do things that are decarbonized. And so this first sort of fully electric BRT has been a challenge. It's a challenge because we're also facing all the long-term issues of climate risk. Dakar is a city where in 2050 you may have peak temperature of 50 degrees in certain time of the day, and when you're running an electric bus that is supposed to be air-conned, that may be a challenge. So these are the sort of long-term issues that we also had to deal with while preparing for this project and responding to the public clients' sort of demand and request in terms of providing a reliable, safe, and comfortable mode of transport that is also affordable. Because I think when it comes to transportation, decarbonizing is fine, but we should never forget about the affordability for the user, especially when you think about mass transportation. It's a fundamental key issue for that.
I'm going to go slightly off script and ask both of you a question with respect to adaptation and resilience. How difficult is it to convince your investors to actually spend the money on adaptation in a project, given that the impacts of the climate risk are not immediately obvious, and there may be some resistance to the idea of paying to adapt a project for something that has yet to happen, that may happen sometime 20, 30 years down the road, or may never happen. Is it a difficult case to make?
It is not, because we approach it as an insurance would approach it. So it's very easy to explain to our investors, if we don't invest this now, in 10 years you may lose your investment. So, what's the choice? So it may not be in 10 years, it may be in 20 years, but it's all about the resilience of the investment itself, of the assets. And so making investment at the outset for adaptation and mitigation is quite accepted, actually, today.
Nina, I'm going to turn to you, and the question is not going to be too dissimilar from what you've heard me ask Thierry and Tierno, but Corridori has been instrumental in partnering with public and private sector institutions to define and design climate resilience measures. And the Morova corridor is a critical transportation link in Serbia. The question to you is how has Corridori worked toward making transportation projects more climate resilient in this public-private partnership?
Well, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be participating today in this panel. But it's even more important that this project has been recognized to fit the agenda that we're talking about today. So as you said, this is a critical transportation link, but moreover, it connects over 48 local communities, which over the past have been exposed to historic, very severe flooding events. We're talking about thousands and thousands of acres of arable land.
Nina, I need you to speak a little closer to the mic because you're fading on us. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Is it better now?
It is slightly better, yes.
Yeah, very sorry for this. Yeah. So as I said, the 48 local communities have been historically impacted by severe weather conditions and severe floods. And since 1965 through 1917, May 214, and finally June 2019, we have had such adverse impacts and impacts to lives, not just properties. And it made it obvious that the climate resilience risk assessment that has been conducted in late 2018 needs to find a solution for both solving a mobility issue, but bringing the infrastructure to climate resilience standards. So in parallel to developing the technical design, we have been integrating the most modern and the most adequate, so to say, hydraulic and hydrotechnical works. These works account for almost 10% of the overall investment, which is, or it's anticipated to be nearly 2 billion euros. So we're talking about 59 kilometers of river draining works, but also flood protection measures, which will protect the highway itself, but all of the 48 communities. For this specific endeavor, integral 2D hydrological model has been developed, and it has been developed from the onset of the design stage. Obviously, this was a result of a very meaningful and extensive and long-lasting stakeholder engagement, led by the water management companies in the Republic of Serbia and the designers which have been developing the design models. So currently we have a showcase on the first 17 kilometers which have been put into operation, which had in the past experienced maybe the most adverse impact in terms of flooding. During the latest floods, during this summer, there were absolutely no damages to private property and luckily also no lives. Yeah. So maybe I'll stop here now.
Thank you, Nina. And now I'm going to turn to you, Elena, to get MIGA's perspective on support for low carbon and climate resilient projects. And if you could just talk a little bit about how MIGA de-risks these projects and what we do to mobilize private financing for transportation systems.
Well, thank you very much, Ephiopis. It's an early hour here in Washington, D.C., but I'm happy to be on the panel as this topic is critically important to all of us, not just professionally, but personally. De-risking is critically important for successful financing for both private sector projects and public sector infrastructure projects as well. Because without access to long-term financing, no infrastructure projects are viable, including climate sustainable ones. MIGA's de-risking instrument, specifically the guarantees that we offer to private sector investors and lenders, helping to make projects bankable. From what I hear today and what we heard from our clients, investments and adaptations are becoming critically important to stakeholders. Investors don't want additional costs to repair replacement of damaged assets as it impacts their returns. Government do not on the interruption of service. Lenders, of course, are concerned with possibility of default as a result of prolonged interruption due to climate-related events. But these investments come with costs, and MIGA political risk insurance instrument helps to improve risk-return profile of investments, allowing sponsors to be more comfortable bearing extra costs related to adaptation investment. As for project finance lenders, MIGA PRI allows to extend the amounts of the loans and extend tenors of the loans, making projects more sustainable and bankable. We have a lot of examples being engaged in transportation projects with the significant resilience elements, starting from Kenya Regional Road Rehabilitation Program, and just recently projects in the rail sector such as Petra concession in Gabon, with Meridian, and already mentioned private bus transport project in Dakar. In all of these projects, MIGA Climate Team was working closely with investors on creating strong defenses against climate impact and using our political risk insurance products, primarily transfer restriction and convertibility, war and civil disturbance, expropriation and breach of contract for both equity and, if applicable, project finance loans. We allowed a significant amount of resources for projects and for the resilience component. I wanted to mention that MIGA has another product which is focused on financing public sector projects. MIGA non-honoring of sovereign financial obligation instrument helps government to obtain financing from commercial and investment banks on very favorable conditions and utilize the fund to support sustainable infrastructure development. This product has been used for Marco Corridor, where we helped the government of Serbia to raise initially 400 million of financing, which was used for the construction of the road as resilience element that I mentioned. And we are about to sign another additional financing of around 800 million in support of this project. In terms of climate impact, we also started focusing on the rail sector. And just recently we had supported investment in the Kazakhstan Rail Company. The investment, the financing for the funding of green asset, which contributes to overall strategy of greening the company and making it more climate compliant.
Elena, I'm going to turn to Tierno and Thierry here in the room. I want us to lean forward, think ambitiously a little bit, and I want to ask each of you, what do you think we need to do at MIGA, or what do we need to do in partnership with you to scale financing for green and resilient transportation systems? If I'm allowing you to make a wish of us or of us collectively, because I think actually it needs to be a collective effort. But what would you say? We'll start with you, Tierno.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que le projet de Dakar, qu'on peut qualifier de Greenfield, le BRT, je retiendrai 4 leçons sur lesquelles nous pouvons travailler avec la Banque mondiale. Il faut qu'on élargisse à AFC, à MIGA et même au secteur privé dans son ensemble. Meridiam va tirer aussi des leçons importantes. La première chose, je pense qu'il faut travailler sur l'allotissement des marchés. Il faut qu'on ait les concessionnaires de réseau, on peut même dire de réseau, suffisamment tôt, dès que les études sont finalisées et qu'on puisse travailler de manière très étroite, tenant compte même du fait que le secteur privé et réceptacle du patrimoine pour l'exploitation. Et donc, l'allotissement du marché part aussi d'une hypothèse simple, hein, pour moi, dans le domaine des transports. Il faut que l'État prenne l'investissement le plus lourd, l'infrastructure et une partie des systèmes, et le privé, on le concentre sur le matériel à acquérir pour l'exploitation, sa maintenance naturellement.
A greenfield, and in that regard, we have to say that we are working very closely with the World Bank, with MIGA, and I say we have 4 important targets. Number 1 is to make good partnership with the network that is taking care of the market so that they can appropriate the project and to know that the private sector will be covering the 60% of it in the future. So when they cooperate with the government, they need to make it their own project to see the interest of the exploitation of something sustainable and resilient. That is my number 1. I'll move on to my other 3.
Sur ce premier pilier, le privé joue un rôle extrêmement important. On est globalement sur 667 millions de dollars d'investissement. Le secteur privé amène les 31%. Donc l'allotissement du marché est le premier défi, mais en impliquant le secteur privé suffisamment tôt par rapport au risque d'exploitation. Le deuxième levier, c'est celui de l'allotissement des risques. Si nous sommes dans des secteurs presque sociaux, comme les transports urbains, le privé ne peut venir que si on lui offre un minimum de garantie. Donc ce que nous avons fait à Dakar, c'est de mettre une garantie trafic à 100 000, sachant que le corridor prend beaucoup plus de passagers. Et ensuite, il y a les garanties, elle en a parlé, ma collègue, les garanties apportées par MIGA, mais au-delà de ça, on prévoit aussi un revenu sharing qui permette à l'autorité contractante d'espérer des redevances ayant en charge, pour le coup, la maintenance des infrastructures par rapport à l'allocation du marché.
So further along the lines of what I was saying on the first pillar, the first lesson, as I said, we need to involve the private sector very early in the project. In this one, we're talking about 167 million of US dollars. That is 31% of the whole project. And so that was to complement what I said on the first target. Now, my second one is risk determination. We need to determine risk very carefully. We're talking about a social sector, and of course, in the social sector, we need to give guarantees to the private sector so that they feel the investment is worth the while. And as my colleague was saying, in this case, we guaranteed 100,000 passengers, which is probably going to be more than that, but it's just at least to begin with a guarantee. Also, with MIGA, we can guarantee that the revenues that the authority will guarantee the sustainability of the project and the interest of them continuing in the future with the exploitation.
Le troisième pilier, je vais essayer de synthétiser, il faut forcément, pour faire une Afrique des villes durable, que nos États consentent à faire évoluer la législation. Ce que nous avons fait à Dakar est intéressant, mais il va falloir qu'on le généralise en modifiant le Code général des impôts. L'État, parce que le projet est aligné à ses engagements internationaux pour la lutte contre le changement climatique, a consenti à des exonérations fiscales et douanières pendant les 15 ans de durée de vie de la concession. C'est un apport contributif extrêmement important pour le secteur privé, mais comme le disait Thierry Deo aussi, c'est ce qui permet de rendre les tarifs acceptables pour les usagers.
So the third pillar, when we're talking about an Africa that has to have sustainable transportation, we need to make sure that the law follows what we do. In other words, the government has to support us, for instance, with tax exemption, because that is an incentive for the private sector. Like in this time, in this occasion, they have 15 years of exception of taxes. So, and as Thierry was saying, we also have to think about the affordability for the users of the transportation.
Et le dernier pilier, enfin, il faut parce que je crois beaucoup que l'Afrique des villes se fera avec la mobilité collective, avec le mass transit. Il faut travailler sur un contenu local fort. Donc sur le contenu local, nous avons travaillé à 2 niveaux. Il y a le Fonds souverain d'investissement du Sénégal qui détient 30% de participation de la société de projet. Et il le détient, c'est le deuxième sous-pilier à ce niveau, il le détient pour le compte des opérateurs locaux que nous préparons justement sur ces transitions vers la mobilité collective, sur ces transitions énergétiques et numériques à la fois. Donc ça, c'est extrêmement important parce que si vous ne managez pas le contenu local, ce sont des tensions politiques et les politiques n'aiment pas des tensions et s'il y a des tensions, il n'y a pas de projet. Je m'arrête là.
So let me finish by saying that the Africa of the cities, we need to think about mass transportation to be provided with local content. Sometimes, as we have in Senegal, we have funds, local funds that hold 30%. And this is a way to empower the local authorities. So they have local contents that will accompany and follow these projects in terms of economic transition and digital transition too.
Thank you. Thierry, your wish list for scaling financing for green and resilient transportation systems.
No, I mean, I first should say that, I mean, together with MIGA, we're very much aligned on the sort of understanding of climate finance and sort of the process and the analysis to actually understand the real impact and the real climate risk in those projects and how to decarbonize. So I wouldn't have any wish list on that side. Where I think we could do more is with more capacity of MIGA, obviously, and perhaps there is an area in addition to capacity and perhaps capital for the instrument of MIGA being a bit more liquid for investors. Also, there is an area that I think has not been explored enough, and something which we explored on a first instance together, which is what MIGA provides in terms of sort of quasi-rating for this investment and making them more attractive and less capital charge in long story of regulatory things in Europe and OECD countries where a lot of capital charge is put to those investments, really refraining investors to go there. So how do we do that, and how could we use the climate aspect to also sort of decrease that capital charge and perhaps modulate the sort of MIGA pricing and cover depending on how much you contribute to climate? And I think that's sort of a direction that we may want to explore to make it easier and focus more money to the climate side rather than anything else. But and generally, I think MIGA, because of its very close relationship with the private sector, because we work hand in hand all the time, can use the web of the World Bank Group, which is not always private sector literate, let me say it, to actually move them into being more supportive on those projects, because they can work upstream as they've done on this one, but clearly coming from a very public sector view, and this is when MIGA can help the cousins in terms of understanding what's coming at the end and therefore anticipate some of the things while supporting the public authorities.
Thank you. The good news with respect to regulatory treatment of investments that have MIGA support is that we're in active conversations with Basel to see if they can come to a uniform interpretation with regard to the capital relief that's afforded because of the MIGA support, given that there's varying difference across the world, across the banking regulatory authorities that apply Basel as their capital standards. So hopefully we will have good news sometime in the relative near future. Nina, can I turn to you and get your thoughts on what it would take from us, from you, from all of us to actually scale finance for green and resilient transportation systems?
Yeah, definitely. I heard a couple of statements here which I would relate to. And I would like to add that this was a very specific endeavor and a partner development between the government and the MIGA. It's not just in terms of compliance and providing a climate resilient infrastructure, but this was a national capacity enhancement effort across the agenda that's going on in the Republic of Serbia in aligning with all the climate actions and the responsibilities we've taken. We already now have other public entities reaching out to Corridori to share our experience, how MIGA has helped us addressing some of the climate challenges, so to say. So maybe, as one of the colleagues said, taking these efforts very early at the onset of any planning and showing the government what's the broad support that MIGA can bring. Because in this case, we really had a very long list of direct initiatives, direct support, either technical advice or technical assessments, which we have integrated and our experts have worked directly with. So maybe this could be sort of part of the appraisal package. So to set aside specific funding to plan ahead and assess the risks that are associated with any of the projects.
Thank you, Nina. Elena, I'm going to have you come in and respond both to what you're hearing from Nina in terms of an ask of MIGA, but also to what Tierno said, because most of these public-private partnerships founder or succeed based on the allocation of both benefits and risks in the project as between the public sector and the private sector. So any thoughts of what you'd like to see happen differently in terms of how we get to that allocation of benefits and risk when we work with our private sector partners, and responding to the ask that Nina is making of us in terms of engagement at an earlier stage and helping shape the discussions that take place with government. With that, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I always say that guarantees cannot make a bad project into a good one, but it can make a good project to succeed and perform well. I think the risk allocation is a critically important element of any PPP. It has to take into consideration specifics of a sector, the country's economic circumstances, but all parties should have a scheme. Just relying on third parties to patch holes in the project design or project structure is not a good, sustainable strategy. In terms of how we get involved at early stages, yes, it is really critical to include all parties into the transaction and working together on creating that perfect risk allocation that makes projects succeed as early as possible. And on the point of what can be done more, just wanted to mention that MIGA is actively involved in raising insurance capacity with the private market and other strategic partners. And I think we are one of the largest leveraging institutions that are in the market right now. So I think every dollar we put on guaranteeing investment we raised $16 to support it from other sources. But is it enough? No, certainly not. I mean, the demand is far greater than what we can accommodate for using, our existing system and our own capital and our own syndication program. And I think creating a larger guarantee platforms, leveraging of strength of other institutions is going to be the way forward, starting from our own World Bank guarantee products that could be streamlined and enhanced, and continue with more partnerships with other DFIs in the area of guarantees.
Elena, I think we have time for a question from the audience. We have about 5 minutes left before we have to end. So I'm going to turn and see if there's anybody from the audience who'd like to raise a question for any of our panelists. Yes, please, gentleman back there.
Yeah, hi. Hi. Okay, yeah, hello. Thank you very much all for the insights. My name is Seth Osumante. I'm a climate research fellow from the Climate Policy Lab at Tufts University in the US. And any one of you can pick my question, but the key question I want to ask is, what is the one primary risk faced by investors in their attempt to invest in, a clean transportation project? What is that one key risk, and what is the way forward in mitigating that risk to be able to ensure that there is more private investment, particularly in Africa, in the clean transportation space?
Okay.
There's a long list of risks, so but I would pick the one that, if it materializes, nothing else happens. The biggest risk is that the project doesn't happen because the authorities don't have the capacity to drive it. And I think this is the example that we have here, is an organized authority with capacity, with a real strategy, with a real goal. And usually that's what's missing, and that's why things don't happen. So that's my biggest risk, is that nothing happens. After that, there are lots of other risks.
Tierno.
Même réponse. Et c'est pour ça que j'ai insisté, c'est important de démarrer par le début, parce que l'Afrique n'est qu'au stade très gestationnel de ces transitions urbaines. Donc pour moi, ces trois piliers simples, les deux sont extrêmement importants. La gouvernance par des autorités organisatrices de la mobilité compétentes, et immédiatement les doter de stratégies de mobilité à long terme. Ensuite, on peut travailler sur le financement, et MIGA a plein de choses à proposer avec les autres.
I would definitely agree with what Thierry just says, and this is why I insisted that governance and planning and long-term planning with the local authorities is key, and we have to embark them on board of the project for it to succeed from the very beginning.
Nina?
I would also say lack of capacity, but also lagging of the legal framework that will fully support the integrated climate and technical solutions. So I see that, and also underestimating the risks that we're facing. Maybe these are the three areas.
Thank you, Nina. And Elena, you've worked on a multiplicity of transportation projects. In your experience, what is the key critical risk? Do you agree with Thierry, or do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I agree. I agree with everyone. I mean, but the complexity is far more greater, and I think that from what we've heard from investors, is the contractual risks that arise from a weak capacity within government institutions, but also from weak financial standing of government-owned companies that are involved in transactions and very often are failing on their responsibility to pay or abide by the contractual obligations.
Elena, Nina, Thierry, Tierno, thank you for joining us on this panel today. Round of applause for our panelists, please. Thank you.
Thank you.